I flip the switch on the battered mic, and the old transmitter crackles to life. Outside, the world lies parched beneath a sickly salmon sky, an unrelenting haze of dust and rage that stretched on for years. The sun, once a gentle orb of warmth, now glares like a brand, burning every twitch of green into tendrils of ash. I can feel the heat through the cracked window pane. It presses against my skin in waves, reminding me I'm alive, yet painfully aware of every breath. The land is unrecognizable. Where rivers once wound like silver ribbons, there are deep fissures that yawn wide enough to swallow hours of my memories. I remember the laughter of children along the banks, skipping stones over clear water, now gone, replaced by cracked mud so sharp it would cut a man's foot in half. The skeletal remains of factories and apartment blocks stand like ancient tombstones, rusting quietly in the wind. Sheet metal flakes lazily from their sides, casting brittle shadows over a world that learned too late how vital water truly was. They say this drought has lasted a decade, though time has begun to blur. Rain hasn't fallen in long enough that old journals use words like last week for events that happened years ago. I've lost track of calendars entirely. Days bleed into each other in the same color palette, muted golds and browns, the exact shade of dust. At dawn, the horizon glows with the promise of another scorched day, and at dusk, it bleeds out like a wound refusing to heal. Even the winds carry a metallic tandist, so fine it lodges in your lungs and leaves a bitter aftertaste every time you swallow dot in the towns beyond my makeshift studio. Governments have dissolved into rumor. There is no capital, no president. No single power strong enough to pretend order still exists. Instead, pockets of survivors cluster around broken wells, trading what little they have: a few drops of water, a battery cell stolen from an old solar array, a can of spoiled beans picked clean of the edges. Some call themselves factions, the harvesters, the remnants, the iron hand, but their names don't change the facts. Hunger and thirst are the only laws here. I've seen caravans of scavengers, faces wrapped in threadbare scarves, their eyes hollow as an empty cistern. They hunt for water sources like wolves, unafraid to kill for the smallest puddle. I've heard the rumors of a blue well up north, a spring that still bubbles. But those are just whispers, carried on the wind some days. I cling to them, like lifelines. Other days, I wonder if they're simply mirages conjured by desperation. Food is a memory too. The last functioning farmland is a brittle patch of sun-bleached soil where nothing grows but thistles. All around, the skeletons of crops stand guard over the nothingness. I forage for roots that might still hold, moisture-bitter, shriveled, things that barely numb my hunger. Sometimes I sift through the remains of old grocery stores, careful not to collapse the rusted doors. The shelves are empty or piled high with spoiled cans. I taste metal more often than I taste any real flavor. Even technology is on its last legs. My generator sputters on borrowed fuel, its exhaust heavy with the promise of one more broadcast. Electricity flickers through these wires as though it resents every second. Radios are our lifeline, and every broadcast tower still standing is a beacon of human persistence. Tomorrow it might die so. Tonight I speak. I describe this world because if I don't, no one will. Night offers no relief. The air cools only by a few degrees, and dust devils dance across the landscape under a sky turbulent with settling particles. Stars are few and far between, lost behind the haze. Once I'd lie awake staring at constellations. Now I press my back to the cold metal of this transmitter room and listen to my own heart thudding like an alarm that can't be switched off. Yet, in all this ruin, I still search for fragments of life. A stubborn tuft of grass sprouting between cracked pavement. A lone cactus blooming defiantly at the edge of a dried reservoir. These small rebellions remind me that the earth remembers how to heal, even if we have forgotten how to nurture it. I describe these moments over the air because I need someone, somewhere, to know we are not completely broken. The world may be an endless drought, but every small sign of life is proof that survival is still possible. So I speak into the static, painting this broken earth with words. For now, this is all we have, our memories, our stories, and the fragile promise that one day green might return. I tighten the mic's windscreen against a gust of hot abrasive air and close my eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of dust and despair. The sky has worn the same bruise-colored hue for as long as anyone can remember, endless, oppressive twilight that never brightens or fades. Once, I thought it might be a temporary shroud, but now it feels like the world's permanent wound. No sunrises paint the horizon gold. No soft blues hint at rain. Only this dull, ember-gray haze pressing down like the lid on a coffin. The land itself seems to have cracked in agony. Where highways once carried traffic between bustling cities, the asphalt has warped into jagged scars, splitting open to reveal parched earth beneath. I recall driving these roads in my childhood, windows down, radio playing. Now there is no traffic, only the tread marks of abandoned convoys and the occasional caravan of scavengers who treat every rusted-over vehicle as a potential treasure trove. Streetlights lean at odd angles, their bulbs long since shattered or fused by heat. They stand like defensive spears against a world that has no use for illumination. Towns and cities have collapsed into anonymous ruins. The skyline of what was once before we forgot, Philadelphia, is now a ragged silhouette of skeletal towers. Their windows gone and steel beams jutting skyward like broken ribs. Parking garages have crumbled. Cars abandoned on every ramp, half buried in dust. In the plazas, fountains lie empty, their marble basins cracked and stained. I walked through Center City yesterday, past the hollowed shell of a hospital, its facade pockmarked by time and neglect. Ambulances rust where they stopped. Wards within hold nothing but brittle charts and the faint memory of screams. Rivers that used to course through valleys have dwindled to nothing more than dry troughs. The Schuylkill is a series of stagnant pools, foul with algae, their banks, choked by long-dead reeds. The mighty Delaware is a thread of mud and peeling silt. I used to fish those waters as a kid, catch bass perch. Now, I drop my canteen into a pool and worry more about what teeth might lurk beneath its surface than any fish that might nibble my line. Water isn't a right, it's a currency, traded ounce by ounce in ramshackle bazaars. Most governments collapsed when the reservoirs ran dry. Borders dissolved, armies disbanded. Now, power belongs to whoever can control the next well or pump station. I've heard of the Iron Syndicate, who patrol the pipelines with armed convoys, demanding tribute from scattered settlements. Then there are the harvesters, who roam the farmlands in patched-up trucks, salvaging whatever crops still grow from supercharged irrigation systems, patched together from solar panels and batteries. Some call themselves settlers, but their settlements are nothing more than squalid encampments of tarps and sheet metal, bristling with makeshift turrets that fire warning shots at night. Churches stand empty, save for the ones that have been repurposed into community outposts, places where survivors gather to barter, share rumors, or take turns on a single squeaking radio. I broadcast from one such refuge tonight, an old library with walls crumbling but still stocked with moldy volumes. Books are prized now, not for stories they contain, but for the sturdy paper we strip down into filters or kindling. I've traded weather reports for a handful of pages, say anything to feed a fire, to stay warm when the nights dip below freezing, as they often do in the desert winds. Wildfires rage at the fringes of what was once forested. I can see the flicker of distant flames through the haze, red and golden, dancing like malevolent spirits. No crews come to fight them. There is neither manpower nor water. Instead, the edges of towns burn, then smolder, and bodies are left. Among the ashes, picked over by vultures and coyotes, I carry a small pack of binoculars on my belt. Sometimes I peer toward the horizon and wonder if those fires are any sort of signalin' angry message from a planet that no longer feels obligated to sustain us in this world. Every day is a ledger of losses. We tally what we lose: water, shelter, friends in the back of our minds, but sometimes we forget to subtract until we stumble over the emptiness. I lost my brother somewhere between here and Lancaster County. He'd gone in search of a rumored aqua well, and the supply never sent us word. I imagine him out there under this bruised sky, searching to perhaps alive, perhaps just another whisper in the wind. Yet, despite everything, I can't stop scanning the horizon for signs of change. I map the patterns of dust storms, hoping to time my broadcasts between the worst of them. I listen to the crackle of static with the same eager anticipation I once reserved for chart-topping songs. Somewhere, I tell myself, someone is listening, an outpost on the edge of the Rockies. A survivor huddled in a canyon town, or maybe a child born in this drought who has never seen a drop of rain. Tonight, I describe this ravaged landscape, not because it holds beauty, but because it needs a witness. When landmarks vanish and memory fades, stories are all that bind us to the world we lost and the world we might still reclaim. And so I speak into the unending drought, hoping my words carve a path through the hazen anxious beacon in a sky that refuses to clear dot. My name is Miles Harrington, and for as long as I can remember, I've spoken into a microphone. Before the drought, I was a local DJ, spinning old vinyl records and reading the morning news between songs. My life was punctuated by coffee breaks and traffic reports, by the familiar faces in the newsroom and the predictable artifice of weather forecasts. Now, the only weather I forecast is death, and yet, despite everything, I still speak. I broadcast from what was once the basement of an elementary school, its classroom doors sealed with scavenged plywood. I cobbled together my studio. With salvaged electronics, a crank-powered generator salvaged from an abandoned ambulance, a patchwork of antenna wire strung across the cafeteria, mic stands soldered from broken appliance legs. Every night, I pedal the generator, my thighs burning with each revolution to feed this voice into the static. The radio waves carry my words to lonely pockets of survivors, to bunker dwellers and scavengers waiting in the dark. I don't know who hears me, but I speak anyway. Survival, I've discovered, is as much about routine as it is about luck. I rise before dawn, though dawn is hardly distinct in this hazy light band sweep the antenna of dust before it clogs the signal. I check my water supply, 12 liters in barrels. I traded 4 old library books, 2 in my canteen, rinsed, and refilled every few miles from murky roadside puddles. I ration my meals, dehydrated beans, foraged tubers, and the last of my seed bank cabbage and kale that sprouted despite the heat. I journal each drop of water I use. Once I miscalculated and ended up nearly passing out in a wind-scorched alley in the afternoons. I venture beyond the town's broken perimeter, scouting for supplies. I carry a backpack strapped tight against my chest first aid kit, water purifier, half a loaf of saved bread, a pitiful handful of solar cells. I've learned to read the sky's dust patterns, to anticipate the micro-tornadoes that barrel through the plains. I keep my head down in those storms, pray my ears remember the way back, and keep moving until the air clears. When I find abandoned farms, I root through the scorched fields, collecting pods I can crack open for moisture. It tastes like bitter hope, but it sustains me. What drives me is not merely fear, though fear is a faithful companion, but responsibility. When the world went silent, I promised my listeners one thing: I would keep talking. I owed it to my little sister Clara, who died of thirst before she turned 12. She used to peek into the studio, grinning, hands clasped behind her back, waiting for me to finish a song so she could play the drum machine. I never got to teach her how to pedal the generator. I never got to tell her there would be a tomorrow. Her memory is the rhythm I pedal to, the pulse beneath every broadcast. Loss is as constant as the dust storm. I've lost friends, people I scavenged with, who vanished when we disagreed over a drop of water. I've lost faith in institutions, banks, governments, NGOs once, pillars of society, now empty names on cracked signage. I'll never forget the day I returned to the old courthouse. Its columns lay toppled like ancient monuments to arrogance. The judge's gavel was gone. The law dissolved with the last reservoir. Now, justice is meted out by whoever holds a rifle. Yet, I've held on to small rituals that keep my humanity intact. Every broadcast ends the same way. An old lullaby Clara taught me hummed into the mic. I don't know if anyone else remembers it, but it anchors me. When the world squeals with static, that lullaby reminds me I'm more than a survivor. I'm a storyteller, a witness, a keeper of memory. Without stories, we're just beasts scratching at dust. I've salvaged fragments of the past to sustain those stories. Dog-eared books, tattered photographs, scratched vinyl covers. I keep them in a locked metal cabinet beneath my broadcast desk. A battered photograph of Clara in a yellow raincoat sits there. You can still see the raindrops beating on the fabric. I treasure it, knowing rain is a memory too. Each time I open that cabinet, I feel her smile, and I steel myself against despair. My nights are hours of transmission and reflection, I announce. Water levels I've heard from passing nomad traders. I share rumors of a well in the Rockies, of glacial melt bridging streams again. Sometimes the chatter is nonsense fish tales of oasis cities built underground. But every story, true or false, sustains someone's flicker of hope. I've learned to parse the rumors for kernels of reality. When a convoy recently returned with 5 liters of clean water, I scrambled to corroborate the coordinates before announcing them. Misdirection can kill more surely than thirst. In solitude, I wrestle with guilt. Survivor's guilt, they call it. I was supposed to protect my neighbors when the pipes dried up, when the water trucks stopped coming. I was supposed to fix the generators, source fuel, organize rations. But fear and exhaustion got the better of me. I barricaded my door one night when a mob demanded water, and I let them go, unbloodied but thirsty. I replay that moment each night, the sound of their fists on plywood, their voices cracking in anger. I wonder if I could have saved even one of them if I'd been braver. Still, every morning I pedal the generator again. I cannot stop. I must not stop. Because as long as my voice carries on the wind, there is someone who might hear a call to action, who might remember how to hope. My broadcast is a lifeline. It binds us together when the world unravels. There are times when the static overtakes me, when I fear the station will die with my own heartbeat. But then I think of Clara's grin, of her laughter echoing in these ruined halls, and I force my hand to the key. I press the talk button and begin again. My name is Miles Harrington, and this is my confession, my testimony, my plea. I have seen everything fall apart, and yet here I stand, frail, dusty, but unbowed. I am a survivor, not because I chose to be, but because I cannot bear the silence of a world without my voice. Every night I offer the world this simple gift, a human story, carried across the void, asking only that whoever listens remember who we once were and believe, however faintly, in who we might still become. The crisis we face now began quietly, as all great disasters do, on imperceptible shift in wind patterns, a slight uptick in average temperatures. But soon, subtle warnings became undeniable calamities. 3 years ago, the first of what we call the stellar summer days scorched the plains at 125 degrees Fahrenheit, 52 degrees Celsius. Crops wilted before dawn. Rivers evaporated beneath midday sun. Our weather models, once arcane graphs on scientists' screens, into stark reality. The jet stream had buckled northward, trapping heat in a permanent blister over the continent, while the Pacific's El Niño cycle intensified until it became a furnace of humidity that never yielded rain. I remember the night we lost the wind turbines. A colossal dust vortex, half a mile wide, tore down from the Badlands, shredding turbine blades like paper. The resulting blackout plunged our makeshift community into darkness. That night, under a sky swirling with orange grit, I saw the first true face of the crisis, relentless, unmerciful, blind to human hope. Since then, the drought morphed into something more malevolent. We've endured dust storms, so thick you could taste them finely milled earth, lodging in your lungs, coating your tongue with grit. Within hours, visibility dropped to 0. In those blackouts, I've felt panic rise in my chest, a tightening no breathing technique can soothe. Last month, a series of burn winds raced off the western slopes, hot, dry gusts that ignited scrubland into wildfires. The fires swept through the outskirts of our camp, forcing us to flee with only the clothes on our backs and jerrycans half filled with water. By dawn, smoke choked the horizon. By evening, the embers had claimed another settlement, yet drought and dust are only part of this disaster. Paradoxically, we've also experienced toxic rains, brief, violent storms, where the air charged with minerals and agricultural runoff turns the first droplets into corrosive acid. They burn through tents, strip paint from vehicles, and leave metal framework pitted as though shot with buckshot. I still bear the scars on my forearms from collecting barrels of rainwater, only to learn it eats through purification filters. In minutes, Shechday brings new faces. Some are desperate allies, others predators. A convoy of gray riders arrived at our gates last autumn clad in scavenged military gear, brandishing scavenged M240 machine guns. They demanded fuel and water, offering safe passage in return. We refused. In the clash that followed, 5 of our neighbors died. Their bodies lay along the fence for hours before vultures came to picket them. When I found the rifle dropped by a gray rider's corpse, I held it in trembling hands, weighing the cost of violence against the price of surrender. Then there was Janelle, a former hydrologist from Montana, who stumbled into camp clutching a battered binder of well logs. She carries hope in her voice when she speaks of aquifer recharge rates, telling us that if we conserve 1 drop per person per day, the Great Basin's deepest aquifers could last another 2 years if not siphoned by rogue operators. Her arrival split our fractured group in 2, those who saw reason and those who mistrusted her data. The tension still hums through our ragged community. Every resource is on a knife's edge. Water tables have dropped more than 200 feet in the past 5 years. Wells we once drilled to 500 feet. Food supplies are equally dire. Genetically modified, drought-resistant grains promise yields in arid soils, but their monoculture vulnerabilities were laid bare when a heat wave killed entire fields in a single night. Even solar power, the one technological marvel we hoped would outlast fuel shortages, falters beneath. 10 days of dust storms that block sunlight entirely. Our fuel reserves are pathetic by pre-collapse. Standards, a few barrels of biodiesel culled from abandoned generators, enough to power our pumps for a few more weeks. We barter every liter we can spare for water, knowing well that without pumps, wells become worthless holes in the earth. I ride my bicycle-mounted generator to settlements 20 miles south, trading shortwave weather reports for half a barrel. At a time, the legs that once climbed staircases in office buildings now pedal survival on cracked pavement the social fabric has unraveled. Courts and law enforcement evaporated when the Santee Aqueduct cracked under shifting bedrock. Schools closed. Hospitals converted into water distribution points, where children once learned to read Braille and Morse code. Now they learn to dig, swales, and repair drip irrigation. Memory of the old world is becoming myth. Plastic bottles, once littered everywhere, are now so scarce that finding an intact one is cause for celebration, though we scavenge their fragments for kindling wildlife. 2. Fights for survival. Migratory birds that once traced aerial superhighways along the Mississippi Flyway have rerouted through urban canyons, starving in the shadow of broken skyscrapers. Predators have moved closer to human settlements, driven by hunger. Coyotes, wolves, even mountain lions prowl our outskirts, drawn by the smell of cooking grease at mealtime. Each dawn, the perimeter alarms we rigged from bicycle bells and tin cans test our nerves as they screech, predator or person. In each broadcast, I try to ground our chaos in science, because understanding gives us agency. I explain that the axis tilt wobble, compounded by polar ice cap melt, has shifted climate zones northward, turning one's temperate fields into ovens. I cite temperature logs I downloaded before the blackout, average summer highs climbing steadily by 3 degrees Fahrenheit, 1.7 degrees Celsius. Per year, I share humidity charts showing relative humidity plunging to near zero values, turning sweat into useless moisture on skin. Then I offer practical survival tactics to collectors. Lay out sheets of tarp at night on bare ground, in the cold, desert air. You'll collect several ounces of dew by morning small, but life-sustaining. Solar stills. Dig a shallow pit, place a container at its center, cover with plastic, and weight the center so condensation drips into the container. You can harvest up to 1 liter of water a day this way. Clay pots, bury porous ceramic pots in damp soil. Water seeps through and cools by evaporation on the exterior. Wrap in a damp cloth to maximize cooling and condensation. Dust masks, fashion. Them from layered bandanas soaked in a weak bleach solution. The chlorine helps neutralize a portion of airborne pathogens and acids. Rationing. Limit water to no more than 500 milliliters per day when conditions are stable. Increase to 1,000 milliliters only during intense labor or heat spikes. But, I warn, these measures stretch thin when storms grow longer, fires spread faster, and foes grow bolder tonight. I broadcast this under a sky roiling with purple-tinged dust. We have no illusions of victory. Our goal is endurance. Each tactic we share, each drop we conserve, each alliance we forge, buys us more time to pray that the jet stream will shift back, that the rains will return in a hesitant drizzle, that the world remembers how to breathe again. Yet every hour the cut-off siren hums a low frequency, tone warning of an approaching storm-end. I know survival is a race against the elements and against other survivors who see our water as theirs. To claim, I grip the mic and speak into the static, my voice tight with urgency. Listen closely. Tonight's wind will shift southeast. Seal all openings and cover your antennas. If you follow our dew collection method, you'll harvest at least 8 ounces by dawn. Conserve your last battery cells for the critical call-out channel on 7.12 megahertz. Above all, travel in pairs and carry defensive tools, fire-hardened knives, or blunt instruments forged from discarded steel. Do not engage raiders unless you must. Stay alert. This is not a plea. It is a blueprint for existing another day. Because in this unending drought, knowledge is as precious as water, and survival hinges on both. And so we fight on pedaling, broadcasting, scavenging, holding our breath between dust storms, hoping that the next dawn is the one when the first drop of rain finally falls. I pedal the generator until my legs tremble, then shut it off and press my forehead against the mic. The night's broadcast is done, but the urgency never relents. Since Janelle arrived with her binders of data, every day feels like the moment before a storm electric with possibility, yet heavy with the weight of what might go wrong. The first crack came at dawn. I climbed the watchtower, a makeshift scaffold of scavenged steel girders, to inspect the water tank. Through binoculars, I saw its surface dotted with more dust than water. The level had dropped by 2 inches overnight. 2 inches might sound trivial, but in our ledger, it represents a week's supply for 20 people. I scribbled the new figures into my journal, thumbs smudged with graphite, and swallowed the dread knotting my stomach. By midday, the temperature had soared past 115 degrees Fahrenheit, 46 degrees Celsius, and the horizon rippled like a warped mirage. I tore my bandana from my neck and buried my face in it, tasting grit with every breath. The midday sun was merciless. I knew scavenging today meant walking through a furnace, but our rations were all but spent. Our beans, blackened and brittle, clattered in the cupboard. The last solar cell hung limp on the aridust choked, delivering only a trickle of current. Soon, the radio may go silent for lack of charge. I found Mara near the generator shack, rocking under a tarp to shield herself from the sun. Under her arm, she clutched a dented canteen dyed with rust. "You heard them last night?" she asked without looking up. The iron syndicates moving south. They'd been pushing through territories, demanding tribute 10 liters of water per family, plus half our stored fuel. "They'll be here in 2 days, she said, voice low and trembling. Or sooner. Conflict cracked through our camp like lightning on dry grass. A meeting was called under the skeletal remains of the gymnasium roof. Aging families huddled around a battered whiteboard where Janelle scrawled aquifer maps and predicted flow rates. Some leaned forward, eyes bright with hope. Others glared, knives twisting in their belts, convinced the data was a trap. "We can't hand over our water," growled Anton, a former steel worker whose blistered hands had built half this settlement's fortifications. "We fight." I stood between them, heart pounding. "We can't win an open fight," I said, voice brittle. "They have rifles and heavy vehicles. We have patched rifles and nothing that can stop armor." Silence settled before a ripple of agreement. Fear tempered rage, but faces stayed hard. Survival sharpened teeth on both our sides. That night, as I broadcast Anton's warning channel silent frequencies, only warriors use I felt the line between ally and enemy blur. My neighbor Rosa wept as she loaded shells into her pistol. I remembered the Rosa Hood sewn blankets for my broadcasts, humming lullabies into the static. Now she loaded weapons for what she called the final stand. The next morning, the raid came at first light. A roar of engines echoed through the valley, and the Iron Syndicate's convoy appeared on the rigid column of armored trucks, belching black smoke. Raiders leaned from hatches, rifles leveled like an executioner's blade. We had hours at best to decide, fight or flee. I grabbed my canteen and sprinted to the antenna array, hands shaking. Through the static, I called out, "All stations, code Crimson, Iron Syndicate approaching. Evacuate non-combatants. Retreat to the West Ridge. Repeat." My voice cracked, but I pressed on. I'd memorized our only safe escape Rutan Old Mining Shaft entrance, 3 miles west. My broadcast was the blade that might cut through fear amid the chaos. I caught sight of Janelle clutching her binder, her face streaked with sweat and dust. "You have to come," she yelled. She led me to a hatch beneath the gym. Inside, the shaft plunged into darkness. This entrance leads to the old Kellerman mines. The tunnels run under the ridge. You can move through without being seen. I hesitated. Trust had become a currency more scarce than water. Could I gamble our survival on the word of a stranger, armed only with maps, yet the alternative standing our ground against a better armed force felt like certain slaughter? "Lead on," I said. The mine shaft smelled of rot and stale air. We descended on ropes of salvaged rope, every creak echoing a warning. Dust motes danced in our headlamps as we navigated broken rails and collapsed passages. Janelle pointed to her log. "If my calculations are right, we'll emerge behind their lines, near an old water treatment plant. Even a trickle could refill half our tanks." I studied her face by flashlight. Lines of fatigue etched her cheeks, but her eyes burned with conviction. In that dim tunnel, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. Hope. Emerging into the morning light, we crouched behind scratched concrete walls. Through binoculars, I saw the settlement ablaze, smoke and flame twisting into the sky where our home once stood. Heart twisting, I loaded my pistol, but Janelle tapped. "My arm, go," she whispered. "Water first. Then we get everyone." We slipped through empty streets, Raider scouts nowhere in sight. For a moment, the world seemed frozen in, unreal pause between destruction and survival. We reached the treatment plant entrance, its gates rusted shut. Janelle used a crowbar she'd tucked into her belt. The metal groaned but gave way. Inside, we found pipes still dripping slowly, almost reluctantly. We rigged a hose to the main valve. Water, cold and pungent, spilled into our jerrycans. I tasted it, and my knees buckled. It was salty brackish, with mineral runoff, but life-saving. We filled every container, 3 dozen liters, enough to sustain 30 people for days. We'd done it. We'd stolen water under the Iron Syndicate's nose. As we made our way back, carrying precious burdens, doubts gnawed at me. What if they discovered the breach and set a trap along our return path? What if the shafts collapsed behind us? Every shadow looked like a threat. Every distant engine roar sounded like doom. But when we reached the ridge where the non-combatants, huddled in fear, I called out over the walkie water, secured. "Move now, quietly. Follow us to the ridge safety ahead." One by one, 30 souls stumbled from the wreckage, faces bright with disbelief and relief. Children clutched jugs against their chests. Elders leaned on makeshift crutches. They called out blessings as we passed, though I felt no victory, only the brittle weight of what we'd left behind. That night, I broadcast the story hour, harrowing. Journey through tunnels, the taste of brackish salvation, the faces illuminated by flickering lantern light. My voice trembled with exhaustion and triumph, but as I signed off, I added a caution. This is not over. The Iron Syndicate will come looking for us. We've won a concession, not the war. Prepare yourselves. Fortify the shafts. Create diversions. Rotate patrols. Trust must be earned, but hope must be held. In the silence after transmission, I stared at the mic as if it were a window into another world. I felt every ache in my limbs, every drop of sweat stinging my eyes. Yet somewhere in that fatigue lay a seed of resolve. We had passed through fire and emerged with life-saving water. We had risked everything on a rumor, on Janelle's map sand, been rewarded. But tomorrow, the drought will still rage. Raiders will still hunt us. The shafts may yet collapse. Supplies will dwindle again. And I will pedal the generator again. Broadcast again. Fight again. Because in this unending drought, every act of courage, every stolen drop of water, every whispered promise of salvation is a spark against the darkness. And as long as that spark remains, I will keep speaking, keep leading, keep trusting, if only to prove that hope, however fragile, is not a fantasy. It is the only thing worth risking it all for. I wake before the sky even cracks open, before the horizon bleeds gray. The wind is already picking up, rattling the tin roofs like dry bones. I press my ear to the generator housing. Its thrum is irregular, sputtering beneath my palm. Outside, I hear distant roaring, not the welcome rumble of rain, but the inexorable approach of another megastorm, an unstoppable wall of dust carrying toxins from scorched earth and chemical runoff. I've heard them call it the purple haze, a storm so dense it blocks out the sun in minutes, chokes turbines, and coats every surface in acidic grit. When it comes, it brings its own hell-fierce winds, corrosive droplets, and the ruin of every fragile mechanism we depend on. Today, it's headed straight for us, yet this morning holds more than impending disaster. Last night, Janelle burst into the broadcast room, clutching her binder, eyes alight. "I found it," she said, voice trembling. "Coordinates for an abandoned aquifer, thousands of gallons, untouched." She traced the numbers on a creased map, latitude and longitude scribbled in coal. The site lay 50 miles east beyond, the old interstate tucked beneath a collapsed dam. If true, this could be our salvation. I stared at her, heart pounding. 50 miles through uncharted dust flats in a rolling megastorm. What kind of madness was this? "We'll need vehicles," I said, thinking of the few battered trucks we had, each one rationed down to a single barrel of biodiesel. "We can't spare the fuel. They'll never last through that storm," she replied, her voice raw. "I know, but it's our only chance." She glanced at the microphone, then back at me, broadcasted, "Rally the convoy. If we wait for the storm to pass, the site could be sealed off by shifting sands. We need to move now." I felt that familiar tug between hope and dread. The storm wasn't just any storm. It was the biggest we'd seen all year. If we stayed, our settlement would collapse, generators would die, water tanks would corrode, and every unprotected soul would choke on acid rain. But if we went, we might never return. I swallowed. All right, within the hour, I pedaled the generator harder than I ever have, my legs burning, sweat beating under my bandana. Through the static, I call out our call sign, the rally frequency. "This is Eco Sierra. All able vehicles, assemble at the north gate within 30 minutes. Prepare for a convoy east coordinates to follow. Water at stake, fuel at stake, lives at stake. Trust your heart or die with indecision. Engines, cough to life across the settlement." I recognize the snarls of the old agricultural tractor, the tinny purr of the three-wheeler rigged with a barrel engine, the strained hum of the school bus repurposed into a bulk transport. Families load spare jerrycans. Men strap rifles to bumpers. Women secure children in makeshift harnesses. Even Anton shows up, face dark, holding a battle-worn AK. I nod at him. He nods back, no words, only purpose. By the time we roll through the outer palisade, the sky is turning a bruised lavender. A wall of dust crests the horizon like a tidal wave. Ahead lies 50 miles of desolate highway, broken only by the rusted skeleton of the interstate's collapsed overpass. We drive fast, engines belching black smoke, wind whipping the convoy into wobbling columns. I ride shotgun on the tractor, map pressed in my lap. Janelle sits at my side, shouting corrections over the roar. Every mile feels like a gamble. Fuel gauge inches toward empty, and the first spits of acidic rain begin to hiss on metal. We pass a blown-out tanker, its cargo long since drained, its tires half melted by the heat. I can't stop thinking, is that what awaits us if we fail? At mile 22, the lead truck's engine quits with a metallic sigh. Its driver, Marcus, curses and steps out into the swirling grit. He pops the hood, nothing but blown belts and corroded wiring. Anton's group stops to help, but I wave them on. Keep moving, I shout. We can't lose momentum. They peel off reluctantly, leaving Marcus to find shelter. Our convoy shrinks. The three-wheeler and tractor, hardened by necessity, push onward. Behind us, the storm advances with relentless speed. The wind's roar is deafening now. I feel the pressure change in my skull. A cloud of fine pink-tinged dust stings my eyes and coats every exposed inch of skin. I can taste grit on my tongue. When we crest the final rise, the dam's ruins appear. Concrete slabs collapsed like toppled columns, twisted rebar jutting skyward. The roadway beneath is half buried in silt. Janelle points to a narrow breach in the structure. There, she yells, voice nearly lost. That tunnel leads to the aquifer. We funnel through the gap, engines spluttering. On the other side lies a hidden courtyard, roof half collapsed, but a mosaic tile fountain stands intact, albeit bone dry. Beneath it is a manhole cover etched with the old city seal. I pull out my crowbar and heave it free. A cloud of stale, damp air greets us. Inside, the shaft descends into darkness. We tie ropes to the heavy frame and lower jerrycans one by one. Below, I hear the distant plink of water. My throat clenches. This is real. I climb down, boots clanking on concrete stairs, slick with algae. The air grows cooler, smells of earth and mineral. At the bottom, I kneel at a grated inlet. Beyond it, a pool so still it mirrors the ceiling. I cup my hands and plunge them into the water, clear, cold, miraculous. It trickles through my fingers like liquid hope. Behind me, the generators falter. The storm outside is tearing at the metal frame overhead. Acid droplets hiss as they strike the concrete. We have minutes before the courtyard collapses, before the storm breaches this refuge. I fill jerrycan after jerrycan, hauling them up the rope. Each is a lifeline, a promise. I imagine Rosa's face when she tastes this water. I imagine Clara's smile. My heart pounds with purpose. Then a shriek from above. The courtyard's remaining roof beam snaps, plunging debris down the shaft. I dive backward just as a chunk of concrete explodes where I stood. Dust fills the air, but I see Janelle frozen at the top, hand outstretched, eyes wide. She's cut her hand on the crowbar. Blood mixes with sweat and grit. I sprint up the stairs, 2 at a time, seizing her hand and hauling her down. She collapses beside the pool, panting. I press my shirt to her wound, hands slick with water. "We've got to go now," I gasp. She nods, gritting her teeth. "Take the rest, give it to them." I race back up with the final cans, emerging into fury. The courtyard roof is entirely gone. Steel support beams twist like spilled noodles. Outside, the storm rages with full force gusts over 80 miles per hour, sand-driven needles slicing through the night. I jump into the cab of the tractor, Jan Ella climbing in behind me. We head back the way we came, water strapped to every rack, our lights cut through the haze like beacons. I glimpse the silhouettes of Anton and the three-wheeler, their lamps bobbing in the distance. They never stopped. The wind batters the convoy, shooting gouts of acid rain through cracks in the cab. The filtered vents wheeze, straining to keep the air breathable. I clamp my bandana over my mouth, already tasting metal. Every mile is a fight, every moment a test of endurance. When we finally crest the home ridge, relief floods me so intensely my vision blurs. Below, the settlement is a flicker of lanterns amid the storm's swirl. We pull in, bells tied to the fences shrieking as wind tears at every fastening. Survivors rush out, faces drawn with exhaustion and disbelief. They swarm the convoy, hauling jerrycans away, weeping, laughing, cradling water against their chests as though it were a child. I shut off the tractor and stumble out, sweat and dirt crusting on my skin. Anton claps me on the shoulder. "You did it," he says, voice a fractured whisper. "You actually did it." I look at Janelle, leaning against the wheel, her shirt soaked through. She smiles, a thin, fierce gesture of triumph and relief. In her eyes, I see the promise of everything we fought for in that moment. The storm's roar dims just enough for a distant howler clarion call carried on the wind. I close my eyes and listen. It could be the sound of a world too broken to heal, or it could be the first drop of rain at the edge of forever. I grip Janelle's hand, raise it to my lips, and murmur, "We survive." This is the turning point. 50 miles of madness, one buried aquifer, and a choice to risk everything for a chance at life. Behind us, the horizon is a wall of fury. Ahead of us, the future pulses in our hands cold, clear water that whispers possibility. And for the first time in years, I believe we might just outrun the drought after all. The morning after our return, dawn broke in a muted haze-pale lavender, leaking through the swirling dust instead of the usual bruised gray I stepped onto. The ridge overlooking our settlement and watched as neighbors carried jerrycans of water down the slope like pilgrims returning from a long journey. Children in ragged clothes splashed droplets on each other's faces, laughing for the first time in weeks. The world had not healed overnight, but for the first time in a long while. I saw something I dared call relief. Our risky expedition had paid off. We harvested nearly 200 liters from the hidden aquifer, more than enough to refill our main tank and replenish emergency reserves. Generators hummed back to life beneath the solar arrays, and the soft buzz of refrigerators that no longer contained spoiled food echoed through the station. We shared water with neighboring outposts, forging shaky alliances cemented by gratitude. Where once our fences channeled fear and suspicion, now makeshift pipelines' rubber hoses patched with duct tape channeled life. Yet, as jubilant as the mood was, consequences lingered. Marcus never returned. The convoy had left him stranded, and every search party I sent came back empty-handed. News of his fate spread through camp and hung in the air like smoke. Janelle confessed she had withheld the full risks of the mission until the last moment. She'd feared I might call it off. Our trust, already brittle, trembled as we realized the cost of hope. In the broadcast room, I wiped crusted sweat and grit from the console and pressed record. My voice was softer than usual, tinged with fatigue and something like reverence. I told our story, the crash of concrete, the plunge into darkness, the electric shock of that first sip of cold water. I warned of the storm's aftermath in stable soils that could collapse mine shafts, deadly mold flourishing in damp corners, the crackling of support beams like distant thunder. I urged neighbors to treat this boon not as a windfall, but as a fragile gift. Still, I ended the broadcast with a refrain I'd written on a scrap of paper. We have tasted water again. We know what it feels like to drink without fear. Guard it well, share it wisely. Above all, remember that hope is only as strong as the hands that carry it. Listeners responded. Crackling voices answered back on the emergency frequency requests. 4 coordinates, offers of fuel, pledges of manpower to shore up the mine's shafts. Each message reminded me that survival is a collective art. No lone voice, no single convoy could secure tomorrow. Hope required community. Late that afternoon, I walked the perimeter alone, canteen slung over my shoulder, the fence line once. A jagged tip of rebar and barbed wire had been patched with salvaged lumber, woven together by carpenters who traded labor for water. I ran my fingers along a plank stained with fresh paint, the words sanctuary, not prison, scrawled in Clara's looping hand. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of life, the drip of water into a holding tank, the distant murmur of children practicing with makeshift instruments, the soft whir of wind turbines spinning again. I thought of Clara, her laughter in that yellow raincoat, and felt a pang of guilt. Hope had come at a cost. Marcus was gone. Others were injured. I'd risked lives on a rumor, a map, a calculation. Why had I believed so fiercely? Was I driven by remembrance or by desperation? In the quiet between wind gusts, I found my answer. Because I had to. Because paralysis would have meant death for everyone. Because to live in this world without hope was to accept extinction. And so, despite the weight of regret, I knew I would lead again, because the world needed more than survival. It needed direction. However flawed beyond our fences, the earth remained scarred. The dam ruins stood like a wounded colossus, concrete slabs strewn across the valley floor, rebar veins exposed to the sky. But in the shelter of the tunnel, I'd seen verdigris seep along the walls, early algae clusters that signaled life reclaiming stone. I'd glimpsed tiny moss patches around seep holes, silent green rebellions against the dust. Here in camp, farmers tended a small plot irrigated with reclaimed mine water. Kale and spinach sprouted in rows beneath a tattered tarp, their leaves tinted the faintest emerald. The first experimental crop in over a year. Each morning, women in wide-brimmed hats knelt to inspect seedlings, turning the soil with cautious hands. The promise of food, after months of boiled beans and scavenged tubers, filled their eyes with something I hadn't seen since before the drought: anticipation. Yet nature's recovery was fragile. That same night, a shock of tremors rippled through. Camp aftershocks from shifting sands and collapsed tunnels beneath the ridge. Alarm bells rang, and we rushed to stabilize the water tank's foundation, jacking up supports and bracing steel girders. The ground beneath us was still in flux, and every breakthrough reminded us how precarious both soil and society remained. No longer saw myself as merely a broadcaster. I was a witness and a steward, a fragile bridge between science and story, data and dream. My hands, once calloused by pedaling the generator, were now also cracked from digging irrigation trenches. My voice, once tuned for music and traffic reports, now carried weather updates, ration announcements, and moral exhortations. I had become the cadence of survival itself. In my journal, I wrote a single line that I returned to each day: a leader is not he who commands, but he who remembers why. I carried it folded in my shirt pocket, alongside Clara's photograph. Memory anchored me, memory of rain, of laughter, of the life we lost, and the life we could still create. The settlement, burgeoned. Tents gave way to Watlandab huts. Rainwater harvesting systems lined rooftops. A rudimentary greenhouse took shape under repaired polycarbonate panels. Medicine stocks, once precious drops, held under lock and key, became communal supplies, managed by a rotating council. We bartered with a neighboring outpost for vegetable seeds. In return, we sent technicians to repair solar panels battered by storms. I moderated weekly forums in the broadcast room, inviting farmers, hydrologists, former teachers, mechanics, anyone with knowledge to share. The room fell silent when each speaker took the mic, then buzzed with questions and ideas. It was noisy and chaotic, more like the world I once knew than this muted wasteland. It was exhilarating, but we never forgot the cost. Near the boundary, a memorial cross of twisted rebar marked where Marcus fell. Each evening, someone lit a lantern beneath it, and I broadcast his name alongside Clara's and the others we'd lost. I described their faces, their courage, their wounds, so that our community would know the price of hope in the pre-dawn hush. I sometimes imagined the purple haze returning broader, fiercer, and wondered if our gains would wash away in acid, rain, and choking dust. I carried a small canteen of water at my side always, a habit born of fear but sustained by necessity. 2 weeks after the mission, I climbed back into the broadcast booth and flipped the switch. My voice was firmer, steadier, but held the same tremor of humanity. "This is Miles Harrington," I said, reporting from Sanctuary Ridge. "We have tasted water again. We have sown hope in dry soil land, for now we stand together. The storm still rages, but we are not its prey." As I spoke, I pictured every pair of ears tuned in across the wasteland. A woman in a canyon outpost, a man crawling through desert dunes, a child drawing circles in the dirt. I realized then that survival was not a destination, but a conversation, a constant exchange of warnings, wonders, and wisdom. My role was not just to inform, but to remind that we are more than dust and drought. In the days that followed, the settlement began planning our next steps, expanding the garden, fortifying the mine entrance, training scouts in water stewardship, developing rudimentary desalination traps for the brackish runoff. Janelle and I pored over maps, dreaming of tapping secondary aquifers. Anton drilled recruitment for a new watch platoon. Mara sketched designs for more efficient dew collectors. Nature offered scant encouragement, a lone rain cloud on the horizon that yielded only a drizzle before veering off course. But every experiment, every seedling, every saved drop of water was a testament to resilience. We understood now that recovery would be measured in millimeters and molecules, not miracles. The dust still glitters underfoot. The wind still carries the taste of acid. Yet here, within cracked walls and patched roofs, life finds a way. In our reflections on loss, on sacrifice, on the slender thread between despair and determination, we found purpose. We learned that the turning point in any story is not the moment of triumph, but the choice to keep moving when victory slips through your fingers. I stand at the edge of this chapter, notebook in hand, water canteen at my side, heart racing, with both doubt and daring. Ahead lie further storms, deeper challenges, discoveries yet unmade. But I carry with me something stronger than any storm, the conviction that hope, once kindled, will cast its light across the darkest horizon. And so we endure one breath at a time, one drop at a time, toward a future still unwritten. I don't know what tomorrow holds. The purple haze still coils beyond our walls, and each breath I draw tastes of grit and acid, a reminder that this world offers no reprieve. Yet tonight, under the cracked panels of our makeshift greenhouse, I look at seedlings' tiny emerald shoots fighting through dusty soyland. I choose to call it victory, not because the drought has ended far from it, but because we have found one more reason to believe that life can endure. Hope is fragile. I know this in my bones, from the time I held Clara in my arms as her lips turned blue for lack of water. From the night we lost Marcus to the desert's cruelty, from every ration miscount that nearly broke us. Yet I also know that hope is the thing that binds us, a porous thread stitched between rattling generators and patched tarps. It is the tremor in my voice when I announce we have water again, the way neighbors pass jerrycans with reverence, the hush that falls over children circling the first lettuce leaves they have ever seen. Tonight, I sit in the broadcast room, the console's lights flickering as the generator sputters through its third ration of biodiesel. The air smells faintly of chlorine and earth. I pick up the microphone and speak slowly, choosing words like offerings. I tell the story of the aquifer beneath the ruined dam, of Janelle's map, of the storm that nearly swallowed us whole, of the hands that pulled each other back from darkness. I tell it so that no one listening will forget that while the world is harsh, we have not surrendered. But I don't end with triumph. That would be a lie. Instead, I lean into the quiet ache that follows every fleeting high. I remind people that this water will not last forever, that tomorrow's storms could poison it, that the mine shafts will need shoring, that the seedlings will need protection from nocturnal frost. I describe the council's plans to ration with humility, to share with neighboring camps, to train new scouts, to build more greenhouses. And I warn that complacency kills faster than thirst. When I finally release the talk button, the silence feels heavy, almost sacred. I fold my hands in my lap and close my eyes, letting the hum of the generator anchor me. In the distance, I hear bells tinkling on the perimeter fence, signaling the midnight watch. Somewhere, a child's cough echoes in a sleeping quarter, a sound laced with vulnerability and life. I rise and step outside into the courtyard, where shadows smear across dust-choked walls. I walk to the edge of the settlement and stare at the horizon. Therein, the roiling Hassai imagine rain, a single brave drop skimming across cracked earth. It feels like both a promise and a dare. The sky will not easily relent. I understand that the fight ahead will stretch beyond my strength, beyond the limits of any one person or one community. But in this moment, I feel a tremor of resolve. We will fight. I think of Clara, of her laughter ringing through these halls. Before they filled with dust, I think of Marcus, his sacrifice etched into our memory. I think of every neighbor whose eyes lit with relief when water touched their lips. I think of Janelle, whose maps were drawn in ink and desperation, who risked everything for this chance. I think of Anton, of Mara, of every hand that lifted earth, strapped jerrycans, polished solar panels. We are a mosaic of stories' shattered pieces, held together by the same thread of survival. The future remains unwritten. We will face more storms, more shortages, more violence from those who see water as power rather than life. We will question our choices, argue over strategy, mourn losses, and taste regret. But each morning, I will pedal the generator again. I will check the water tank. I will walk the fence line. I will speak into the static, because as long as my voice travels across the wasteland, someone somewhere will know they are not alone. So here is my final message. Stay alive, stay human. Guard your hope as you would your last drop of water. Share it sparingly, but freely, for a single spark can ignite a community. Trust each other enough to work together, but wisely enough to protect what you hold dear. Remember that resilience is not just enduring hardship, but rebuilding seed by seed, drop by drop, word by word. I don't promise a lush tomorrow or a world restored. I cannot. But I promise this, as long as I have breath in my lungs and petals beneath my feet, I will carry our story forward. I will broadcast warnings and wonders, failures and small victories. I will remind us all that amid the acid storms and dust-laden skies, we still choose life. The wind picks up, rattling the greenhouse's plastic sheeting. Underneath, the seedlings tremble, but they do not break. They thirst for more than water. They thirst for light, and so do we. And so, for tonight, I choose hope. Not because it conquers all, but because it demands that we rise again tomorrow and the day after, until the world remembers how to reign once more.